Hi, welcome everyone for the last panel discussion. So thanks for making it till the evening. I hope we can make it worth a while. So I'm joined by three panelists who are from very different backgrounds, and it would be interesting to see their thoughts in general on this topic of how do we kind of effectively build and monitor and deploy AI in the industries. So I would like to start off with the general trend on what is happening in AI today. I think Andrew Ng, as we popularly know, everyone around knows him in some way, has floated this concept of data-centric AI. So it's I just would like to throw it open in the sense that how do you kind of think about with this new concept floating around of data-centric AI, how does it influence what we do with AI? How does it change anything in the strategy side, or how do we build or monitor AI in general? Maybe Edward, we'd start with you
sure.
know your thoughts in general on this one.
Sure. Hello everyone. So very happy to be here. And just maybe to tell a bit about our backgrounds, so that.
Sure.
So I come from France. I arrived yesterday evening, and I'm the CTO and co-founder of Kili. So we do data labeling, and previously I was working for BNP Paribas, which is a bank, like the biggest European bank, and I created and I was leading the AI lab for the team. And so I think the way Andrew Ng formulated this data-centric AI revolution is really smart, because he finally put a word on something that is so simple, but kind of a revolution, because the way people were developing AI those last few years, 20 years, 30 years maybe, has always been the same. So working on data sets, so CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100, NIST, and so on and so forth, so on fixed data sets, and trying to improve the model and the algorithm as much as possible, refining the hyperparameters, and so on and so forth. And in fact, when you do AI on concrete use cases, you realize very quickly that, in fact, data is changing all the time. So, for instance, if you try to recognize packaging on supermarket, they change all the time. And so, in fact, you need to refine your data constantly, and you realize that there is much more performance to be created refining and engineering the data set rather than refining the model. And so the idea is that, in fact, data is kind of the new code for AI. And so it's a complete revolution because it triggers a lot of things. So okay, data is the new code for AI. So what it means is that you also need an IDE for data. So like the VS Code, but for data. So a software that helps you to create and iterate on this data very fast. You also need Agile for AI. So like Agile for software development, but on AI. And so this is this idea of data-centric AI. So where you annotate a bit the data, then you train the model, you use the model to retrain the data, and so I think this is something that is opening a lot of possibilities for, and that will accelerate a lot the development of models in our industries.
Cool. So in that, I think I like this framing of thinking about we need a VS Code for data. I think that is what is missing in some way, and I think that's the premise of how the data-centric AI would be. So I think let me then now throw it to Frankie. Basically, you work in more of technology department of Mercedes. I just wanted to understand how data or data-centric AI will play to your company's strategy or your team strategy in general.
Sure. So quick introduction. I'm Frankie Cancino. I'm a data scientist at Mercedes-Benz R&D. Previously, I was actually an AI scientist at Target. And this data-centric AI, I think it is very powerful and very useful. And for example, Edward was just mentioning, Andrew Ng, I remember he had a webcast or webinar that I had attended, and he even gave an example of one of the companies he was working with, they had a model not performing as well as they had hoped. And he split his team into two and said, okay, half of you go work on the data and half of you go work on the model. And let's see what we can do with these metrics. He got all the data back from both of them, presented it on that webinar, and shockingly enough, the model approach, basically looking at the newest state-of-the-art model, it did not improve any of the metrics very much. However, the data-centric team came back and looked at the data. It actually improved it by a significant percentage. So that really opened my eyes to how important data is. I mean, your model is only as good as your data, right? So at Mercedes-Benz and at Target, I have learned that focusing on data not only helps with model improvement, but also explainability, debugging, troubleshooting, looking at issues in the data. So for example, when I've seen a model not performing as well as I had hoped, I go look at the data. And looking at what the data looked like at that time, like a snapshot in time, was there something going on with it? And if so, I investigated. And then from there, you can then do pre-processing, you can look at the actual data, the collection process, et cetera, to find out exactly what's going on. And this will eventually help explain your predictions. It will help improve the model performance. It'll provide stability in what you're producing to the system. So I think this data-centric AI movement is actually extremely powerful and will advance a lot of our models in production. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. So I think the way I understand is like also like in general what we see in academics or in particularly in top research conferences is like we try to build the best models out there, that's the researchers, because the data set is already available. But the real world is very different. Like the first focus is data rather than building the best model out there. And I think what, as Frank is also trying to say, I understand is like, it not only helps in building, but it also helps in monitoring, it also helps in deployment. So I think that is like a very profound area to kind of invest on in some way. With that, I think we have Jacqueline here. I just want to turn it over to her to just see that, like, because she invests a lot in building platforms. So I would like to see how this kind of plays out in like how you think about building platforms in general.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Jacqueline Nolas. I'm the head of data science at Saturn Cloud, and we have a data science platform. And I, before that, spent many years consulting for data science companies. And I think this happens a lot, right? Like this thing we're talking about where like you have people in the AI field who are talking about like we need bigger models and more features, blah, blah, blah. And then you have people who are like in industry being like, no, what I need is the 2 keys for my 2 different databases to actually join. So there's like a big disconnect between how people behave in the field and what's important there versus what kind of is the focus in a more academic setting. And, you know, I think it's interesting for us, you know, and helping build a platform is I think there are a lot of people who go out and set out to build data and AI platforms. They're like, the problem is the data. We need to make the data better. So they're like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a platform that makes this stuff easy for you, right? And the idea of like, we're going to make data cleaning easy. But I think at the end of the day is every time I've seen someone try and do that, it ends up really hard and they can't do it, right? Because the data being hard, like the fact that it's hard to get the AI to work well on data and you have all these data cleaning issues and feature issues, it's not that we just haven't like, it's just that we haven't thought of a clever way to store a database in it. It's like these are very human problems, right? They're like this team decided to use this key and the other team decided to use, they decided to store US states as 2-letter codes, and that team decided to use strings, and that team stores country name, and that one does USA. Like these are all humans making decisions, and that sometimes a lot of the data problems people have are, well, how do we get humans to work together? And you can't just make an easy AI platform for that. That's not what Saturn Cloud tries to do. That's why I'm bad-mouthing the whole idea of building a platform for that. But I think that's just a recurring problem we have in the field of AI is like, okay, data is really important, and yes, data is where we should be focusing, and I think that's correct, but how do we actually fix the human problems that go into the data? I don't know, that keeps me up at night as an AI practitioner.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take because I think you brought up a point of like we need to standardize the way we store data also at some level to kind of make sure we have enough developer velocity so that people are not, like people want to build models, but then people should not get stuck in this kind of weird problems when the data is not standardized across 2 data sources or 3 data sources. I think that's a very common problem we also observe in different parts in our company and other companies, that the data is stored, it's very clean also, but it's not standardized. So I think, yes, so I believe that, so thanks for actually adding your thoughts. I believe that like one of the focus on building this effective AI could be just like focusing on the data parts more than just the modeling parts more in some way. So with that, I want to move the conversation in a different direction. Like, so we see like obviously the big companies like Meta, like Google or someone, or other companies like Mercedes also, right? They have all the resources to develop all sorts of tooling to build, monitor, deploy AI. I just want to kind of shift the conversation in the sense that how do we think about like if somebody is starting off, because now there is a proliferation of these tools which are called as ML ops tools in some way, and you have tool for every step of the process in machine learning pipelines. But for a new company that is starting out, or for a new team that is starting out in some way building these systems, it's quite overwhelming of which tool to choose and what are the principles to apply in first place to kind of which tools to choose in this case. So I think it's a very interesting problem that many teams I have seen facing. So would love to start off maybe with Jacqueline again on the, like how do you think about this problem in general?
Yeah, so I think about this a lot too, because I think with AI in particular, the way AI projects start, right, is usually have some executive at the company who's like, we should use AI to X, Y, Z. And it is totally unclear if using AI to do X, Y, Z would actually work. Like, could you train a model to even do that? And if you trained a model, would it actually provide your company money, right? Like, even if you could give your customers good recommendations, would that actually move the needle? And I think the really valuable thing for companies to do is to just as quickly possible verify that this thing is going to be valuable, and then actually go from there only after you've gotten a consensus that, yes, this is a good idea. And so what that means is like, okay, you know what, maybe wait on having the model retrain itself. And like, hey, you know what, maybe it could just be, like, maybe it could be a couple, like even just simple business logic to start, just to see if having anything there works and then iterate. So I'm really a start small, get something work quickly, and then start adding on the layers of like automatically retraining and things like that. You know, I think I've consistently seen teams be surprised at how well things still work if you don't retrain a model every 3 months, or if you have your logs stored in JSON blobs rather than like a really cool like storage location that experiment tracks for you. That stuff is all valuable and good and important, but you can always start with the less good stuff and add the good stuff on later. Whereas if you put all the really good stuff in first, then you may run into a situation where you've spent 6 months building something, and it turns out these recommendations aren't useful for customers anyway. So that's kind of been my approach.
Yeah, I think that's, I also like completely agree in that sense that we should kind of think about like how to start small and rather than invest in all the things to build it from the scratch. So in that sense, like I would like to like turn it over to Frankie to just see that how do you, like in your companies, do you, or how do generally in smaller or bigger companies you see like how much tools to be built off the shelf, how much to be built like to just buy it from the other vendors, like, and then what kind of design principles that you have observed in your practice?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked for companies that had a strong philosophy that everything was going to be built in-house, and I've worked for companies that they had off-the-shelf solutions or had licenses with companies. There are pros and cons to both, right? It's more about the maturity, about your team, what are the needs of the team, because, for instance, if you plan to build everything in-house, that's going to take time and team and hiring, salary, etc. If you get it off the shelf, it's pretty much available very quickly. So if your team needs a tool immediately, then you might want to look for off-the-shelf solutions. But the problem is that sometimes that can be expensive in the long run. So sometimes it's better to just build it yourself in the company, because then also the customization of this tooling or the platform. If your team needs certain customized features that are not available off the shelf, they just talk to this other team, they can get implemented. It takes time, obviously. There's probably a long Jira backlog, but eventually it will get implemented. And also it depends. I mean, if you are okay with data storage being in-house on-prem, you have a data center, great. If you need to use Azure or cloud, that's pretty much a standard at this point too as well. So you're not going to face many issues or big changes in that in the near future. So I think it really just depends on the team. And my opinion, I liked having the in-house solutions because I could just bug a team and say, hey, I really want this feature, can you get it for me? And they deliver in a few months, and then next thing you know, I have another feature I already want them to do. So I don't have that with an off-the-shelf solution. I can't just bug another company and say, hey, can you make this feature for me? But at the same time, maybe new features are coming out and they're becoming standard and your company hasn't caught on to it. Now you're behind. So it just really depends on the team and what they need in that moment in time.
Cool. So thanks, Frankie. Actually, one of the things that comes out from this is also like thinking about like the in-house tools are great in the sense that yes, you can have someone to kind of add some feature, or it could be very customized. But as Frankie is saying, it could be much faster to build something with an off-the-shelf solution. I think this is similar to what people face is like in AWS settings, that should I sign up for AWS credits or something on-prem in general. With that, I think I want to kind of turn it over to Edward to just understand one thing, that obviously you own, you're a co-founder of a company in some way, which is an MLOps tool, mainly for data labeling. So I think from your experience, what you have faced in terms of like people trying to build it themselves versus trying to use your solution in there, and what are the principles people have in general selecting these kind of tools?
So if I had to restart an AI team in a company, I wouldn't start with creating a platform and building an MLOps pipeline. So I think it would be the wrong way to start things. And I remember, so when I created this AI lab at BNP Paribas, and it was a bit the same when we created Kili, so three years ago. The first thing that you want to do is just to gain momentum. So to do projects, and so real projects, just to show some success stories. And so this is the very first thing to do when you build an AI team or a company. And so when we created Kili, we started doing consulting projects for other people, just to understand what was their pains and what were their needs and how we could best answer them. And there is a very good book on this topic from Guy Kawasaki, who was working at Apple, and the title of the book is The Art of Start. So it's super interesting. And it was the same thing for when I was working at BNP Paribas. We started with projects, so just having success stories. So this is the first thing. The second thing, when you want to create a team, is just to onboard people, and then they will build the platform and choose just to make our buy. And then the third thing that you want to do to be successful is to communicate. And I remember when we created the team, and same thing, there is a parallel between BNP Paribas and Kili. It was just communicating, so doing a keynote just to explain what you are doing, what is AI, and so that people can map their business pains to what AI is actually able to do. And then you are able to define your strategic roadmap on AI. And so this is the fourth step. And I think that this is this step that actually helps you to answer to the very first question, which was, okay, what should I build versus what should I buy? And this is really when you know where you are going in terms of AI and where you can create an edge to your organization based on data processing and model building, that you can actually answer to this question. And so when it comes to data labeling, data annotation, which is a kind of my core business, so data labeling is kind of so it looks very simple when you first approach the problem. You say, okay, it's just web interfaces where basically you can tag either images or text, and in just like a few weeks with motivated developers you can replicate. But as in any topics, when you start digging a bit, it becomes really, really complicated. Because if you want to be good at labeling, you need to do three things. The first thing is to be fast, because deep learning is very data consuming, and you need to be really good at productivity. And so this is complex. It requires a lot of work on the UX, on integration with models, and on dedicated models, and so on and so forth. Second thing is you need to label with quality, because machine learning is garbage in, garbage out. And so same thing, it's very complex. How to measure human biases, how to spot outliers. It's super complicated if you don't have the ground truth. And so there are a lot of features around this. And the third thing is when you label, you need to make sure that your data set is diverse. Like if you are in automotive and you are building a self-driving car, if you don't pay attention, 80% of your data set will just be made of boring highway images, whereas what you want to have is when your car enters a tunnel, exits a tunnel, under the snow, and so on and so forth. And same thing, and so the topic is related to labeling, is what should you annotate? And so to conclude, kind of what I would say is that just focus on where your core business and where your edge will be, because as any topic, as we see, the MLOps ecosystem is growing and is becoming so complex and so specialized that you cannot do everything if you are not Meta or Google, and so focus on where you can bring value to and be impactful for the market.
I'm just thinking about this now on the buy versus build yourself. And I'm thinking about scenarios where, like, okay, let's just say we're experiment tracking. I've been in situations where my experiment tracking was, I'm just going to save the JSON from the experiment and save the model file to S3, and that was great. And I've had experiment tracking, I've been a customer where we actually used like a tool, like an off-the-shelf tool, and that was great. And I've also been in both the bad situations, if you think of it like a 2x2 matrix. I've been in both the bad situations where we saved everything to JSON in every run, and it was terrible, and we couldn't use that data at all, and eventually we had to scrap it all and go with a vendor solution. And I've used a vendor solution where after 6 months, we're like, this is just an S3 bucket for us. Why are we spending money on this? And I think maybe for me, just thinking like, what can you do is just keep a very keen eye on it, because I don't know if I could have called in advance in those bad situations that I should have something different, but we could have earlier pulled out the bad S3 bucket, or earlier switched from the vendor that we're just paying to be S3 for us. So yeah, I don't know. I just was thinking about that.
No, I think that's a good point. I think obviously the way I would understand this is also like thinking about like, as Edward was also mentioning, that the system is like ecosystem is very complex these days, and when you are starting out, like even if you have the budget, it's not easy to hire to build a very high quality tool for something to build the product that you want. In that sense, like I think when you're starting out, it is helpful to kind of make the point solutions and integrate point solutions to kind of make your product. But at the same time, as Jacqueline is pointing out, like it is also important to think about at what point and in what solution or what point solution you can give away with and build your own, so that you can save the cost in the long term, because I think it can really hurt if you are continuing with that. But it could be a really good Kickstarter, I would say, like in some of the initial steps to kind of get it out in some way. So I think that's very interesting. Now, the one thing I want to discuss more around is like because you all are from different companies in some way, or different kinds of companies in some way. So like, because now when we think about this effectively building or monitoring or deploying AI, the word effective always comes with like you are effective when you are addressing some pain points, or you still have some pain point to be more effective in some way. So I just want to turn the conversation around, like with the kind of different companies, different kinds of companies that you work with, like how do you think about what are the major pain points for maybe your size of the company or your kind of part of the ML business in some way. So I'll start like this one with Frankie, like I think from your team's perspective, maybe you can give a brief about like what exactly might your team be doing, and these are the pain points you observe in general.
I would say my biggest 2 pain points were scalability, and I don't mean that by like resources, compute, storage. I mean, we just scaled 1,000x. Now there's so many models and results that are just like strange, or they've gone wrong, and we just never have experienced that before, and then you just keep repeating that over and over again as you scale. The second one, I would say, sort of intertwined, would be reproducibility. So being able to see all these weird edge cases happening at scale, and then trying to reproduce them in some other environments, so you can start to investigate why. And sometimes, because of the large scale, it's hard to reproduce exactly what happened due to sparse data, for version control, or whatever it may be. But being able to look at both of those, because they both are somewhat intertwined, and then being able to troubleshoot and solve those issues. I think I've spent so many hours and days and nights dealing with the combination of those two to determine why this model or these models were not working properly. And I just couldn't reproduce it, and then I just had to wait for it to happen again before we could put them in production, or we had to scale it back, or revert to a different version, or just stop the scaling.
So like, have you observed also in your thing, like, are there any potential solutions that your team or in general people are working on to make this better in some way? And like, what could have been solutions in general from what you found?
The solutions, I don't have a great answer. I would say the solutions were more along the lines of making sure you document them. You conduct a root cause analysis and you document that, so that you learn from the mistakes. Having UIs or web interfaces that are showing what was going on, so that way you can take snapshots of that or share them with other people to get answers. Sometimes it wasn't even the model. Sometimes it was potentially the data collection process, and there was an issue that we didn't know about, and so we couldn't replicate that because the data pipelines were then fixed. You can't reproduce after that. So it's a lot of communication, documentation, tools to allow you to get insights into whatever these issues may be, and depending on what the issue is, whether it's data, model, the deployment system, the serving, whatever it may be, you just need to be able to keep an eye on all of them at the same time, unfortunately, but make sure that you can keep track of all of it at the same time. Interesting.
So I think, yeah, so like now they're moving on to like maybe Jacqueline, in terms of like you build a platform, your company builds a platform for data scientists, right? And I believe like there are pain points on the customer side, obviously, on what they need from the platform. But in general, while building this also as a tool, right, what are the pain points you observe? Because I would believe still it's like in the purview of an ML ops tool that helps the particular kind of people in ML, like the data scientists or engineers.
Sorry, just to make sure I understand the question, is what are the pain points in building our platform, or do we see in our customers?
Yeah, I think in both sides,
yeah.
Like in general, like what in the building of this ML ops platform also, what are the pain points from ML ops point of view, and also like what customers?
Yeah, so I mean, the point of our platform is we're really like the data science dev environment. Like there's so much ML ops around like auto retraining and auto ML and deploy and the blah, blah, blah. And there's kind of like not that much. And hey, I just want my Jupyter notebook to have a GPU and be able to share it with other people. Like those tools do exist, but there's not as much maturity in that space. And so that's what people tend to come to us for our platform. But I would say, I would say more broadly, the biggest pain point that I have seen in the AI space in general is just, it's hard to find use cases where AI is actually the right answer, right? It's super hard to like find a situation where business logic isn't enough and you have data and it actually, even when your model is trained, it actually has a thing you can then show to a customer that's useful. And so because it's hard to find those, you need a way to iterate through them really quickly. And so that's kind of, and I think that's kind of a recurring theme of what we're saying on this panel of just like, hey, it's actually like, you really got to be smart about choosing whether or not you're using off the shelf or things like that, because there's so much work goes into making a thing that's even, making a thing at all, and then only at the end you find out actually this is useful or not, that you want to make that process really quick. And so, you know, like our platform is a way to do that better, but so are the platform tools that let you deploy more quickly or label your data more quickly. But like all of this is going to the core pain point of like, as a field, we need to iterate way quickly, and it's just hard to iterate because, you know, AI is a complex thing.
Interesting. So, so in that sense, like, is understanding, like, what are the still, like, I would ask this way also then, what are still the pain points that maybe data scientists observe in using this dev environments, like considering you have solved some of them from your platform in general?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of you talk to data scientists about of like, my coworker's code ran for them, but I can't get it to run. Or like 3 months later, I can't get my own code to run. Or like, I wish we could just, you know, like there's a lot of this like, kind of data science work of like getting your TensorFlow version right and blah, blah, blah. And there are lots of things that are tools that try and solve that, like Conda environments and blah, blah, blah. But there are many tools that try and do that. And if each data scientist is using their own tool to try and help with reproducibility, then you have which tool do you use reproducibility issue, right? So there's just like a whole universe of how do we get the data scientists on a team to all kind of coordinate and do the same thing, which again kind of comes back to a human problem of everyone has their own values and likes using tools in different ways. How do you kind of coordinate them a little bit without being like an authoritarian boss? And that's kind of, I think, just a universal problem that I've seen in data science.
Yeah, I think I completely also relate to it. Like on one other day, I was trying to kind of install a tool from GitHub, and somehow the requirements that they've had was like kind of old. And it took me like almost, after years of working in the field also, it took me almost like 2.5 hours to get it right, so that I can at least run the main file in some way of just a GitHub repo. So I think it's like a very popular, like very common problem, I think, which dev environments would kind of solve, and kind of removing those pain points really saves the time for people to kind of focus on the more important core stuff in general. So I think, so thanks Jacqueline. So with that, I would turn to Edward also to just see, like from your worldview of ML ops or ML tooling, right? What are the problems? I think in the both sides, again, I'll ask like, is like what you face as a problem in terms of the pain points to solve this problem? And also like, what are the common problems maybe your customers still have, like the industry has not solved at some level?
So I will start with the customers. I see two main pain points. So the first one is when you actually want to build a model, is just to have the data. So it seems so simple, but I've seen so many AI and teams and made a very good data scientist working on secondary topics just because the data was available, instead of working on topics that really matter for the organization, and they couldn't do it because the data was not here. And so the thing is that they need to realize that you can create the data, basically. From raw data, you can structure it, label it, or whatever in a way, and you need to do it because what matters is that you work on topics that are aligned with the strategy of the company. So I think this is the first thing that prevents companies to ship AI on an impactful AI, so AI on topics that really matters. And the second thing for AI teams is that very often people create models, but they are unable to push them to production. And why? Because there is a mismatch between what is considered as a great model from the point of view of a data scientist and from the point of view of a business owner. So for instance, imagine you are doing document processing in the back office of a bank and for compliance reasons. And so you need to do some kind of classification and an entity recognition, and you achieve a 95% of accuracy. So as a machine learning engineer, you are super happy, but in fact you cannot afford to have 5% of the documents just not triggering alerts if they should. So false negative. And so this is something that happen a lot of time, and it prevents models to be pushed production. Just because the business owners of the project, they won't accept to take this risk. And so the way to tackle it is very often to put human in the loop in production. So to structure a workflow so that there is the model, it takes a first level of decision, of automation, and then for difficult use cases, it goes under the eyes of some kind of human. And so then you leverage the complementarity between the machine, which is very good at doing systematic, but that is not smart, and the human that on the other side is get bored very easily and can do mistakes, but is smarter and has the full context and can make decisions on complex use cases. So I think those two things are really what I've seen the most often, and that prevent to great AI teams to ship AI. And when it comes to data labeling, so it's very hard to offer AI that matters for customers. Why? Because there is a huge diversity of use cases. So it can go from image processing for healthcare to satellite imagery, contract processing, chatbot conversations, whatever. So the way we do it is we offer models to automate some small part of the tasks, such as, for instance, when you want to detect an object on an image at the pixel level, you can use interactive segmentation, where you just have to click on the object and it gives the contour. And so this is this kind of automation that we can propose. And on the other side, there is an API so that our customers can connect their own models to automate things. So yeah, this is the way we tackle those things.
Yeah, interesting. So it's good to know, like how, because of the diversity of the customers, I would believe like it's always a hard problem to solve at some level to kind of build a tool which works across the use cases. So it's like more of sometimes people think about like a 80-20 rule. Also, you can solve 80% of the use cases, but 20% is long tail that you potentially would be hard to solve, because there will be always cases where there is a diversity in terms of the use cases in general. Very interesting perspective. So